Hey, this is Ankita. No Nalini here today, but the show must go on. You are tuned into Prickly Pears, the show where we talk about uninhibited brown women and their prickly points of view. This is season 1, My Mother Said, the season where we talk about things our moms have told us while we grew up or even now, and things we won't repeat to our daughters or to any other woman out there. I'm really glad to have a really old friend of mine on the show with me today. Swagatika, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. Couldn't be better.
I know you really well. Our listeners don't. Can you share a little bit about yourself with our listeners?
Sure. I'm Swagatika Priyadarshini. I grew up in a small town in Odisha, which is a eastern state in India. And I grew up and I did all my education in Odisha. And then I moved to Bangalore to start my career with JP Morgan. And over the time, I've moved places and now I'm building my home in New York City. And I think I realized that the more I have moved, the more I have traveled, the more I have read, the more prickly I have become in my views. Yeah, that's me. And I have been in New York for about 3.5 years now. I moved here just before the pandemic and somehow it's home now. And I'm really excited to be here on this show talking to you, Ankita.
I'm really excited to have you, and I'm sure we'll learn a lot about you as a person as we move through our conversation today. But before we jump into anything coming on, tell me, what did your mother say?
Well, my mother said so many things, but the one that I want to talk about today was why divorce when you went for a love marriage?
I know so many people who hear the first part of the sentence alone, right? Like the whole question of why divorce. And we'll talk about the sentence in itself and the impact it had on you. Before that, share a little bit about your mom, like paint a picture for us.
I always think of my mom as a pioneer woman. She grew up in a rural community in Odisha, but she was a smart student. She read, she read really hard, got a scholarship, got out of her village, went to a boarding school, then made a career in commerce. She was one of the few female professors of her time in commerce in Odisha, and then went on to become the principal of her college. And she's really active. She's very, strong-headed. And she does a lot of things beyond her professional work. She's an active volunteer at Rotary. So she's always been this really strong personality in my life. And in fact, my parents had a long distance relationship for most of their lives. So I grew up with my mom, as my brother and I grew up with my mom, because they decided that my dad's job was transferable. So they decided that it's better for my mom's career as well as for us to be in one stable place. So she was kind of my primary parent for while I was growing up. So yeah, that's my mom for you.
Where in Orissa did you grow up?
This small town called Rourkela. It's also called the Steel City of India there, and it is quite cosmopolitan, even if it is small, because you have people from all around the country coming to work there, and there are a lot of universities. So it's pretty cosmopolitan in its outlook.
I think one of my biggest things is while I was in Bhubaneswar and Orissa for all those years, I don't think I ever managed to get to Rourkela, but I've heard about it so much from you that it's always been on the list, and I hope someday I'll make it there. But what was your childhood like?
So, like I said, my mom was kind of pushing the envelope in a number of ways when I was growing up. So for me, my childhood was about actually seeing my mom being this independent woman who was raising 2 kids by herself. I mean, it's unfair to say just by herself. Of course, my dad was around, but she was doing most of the stuff herself. She had this Luna, which she would, take to the college and then come back and take us to our tuitions. And then, so yeah, I think I had a childhood where I grew up to see my mom being so powerful and independent in the way she lived her life. And I was pretty close to my mom. In fact, my mom used, as a child, when I was growing up, my mom said things that were different from what my friends' moms would say to them. So, for example, my mom would say, "You don't need to know cooking right now. Focus on your studies." Or, "You don't need to think about your dark skin. You are fine. You're beautiful." So I think that way I was pretty lucky to have a childhood where I could just focus on my education and get every support I needed from my parents to do what I want. And every step of the way, whenever I decided to do my engineering or my MBA or do a student exchange program in Paris, it was all well supported by them.
I love that, because these statements that you said about the dark skin and not cooking is actually, some people they've not come on record to say it, but I know of moms who say it all the time. So in many ways, your mom is probably one of our original prickly pears on here.
Right.
So then tell me about the relationship, right? Tell me the story before. Now she said, why divorce? If you had a love marriage, tell us about the love marriage. Don't tell us the person in detail, but when did it start? How old is the journey?
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's an interesting part, right? My mom was a very progressive pioneer woman in her professional life. But I think when it came to dating and came to marriage, I think her views were pretty traditional. So when I started dating the first time in college, I don't think she didn't really like it. She was like, there will be time for you to find somebody. Now just focus on your education, which, happens to a lot of us as we grow up in. It's like, you have to think about yourself. But I also think that's because they grew up with this whole focus of, making it. And then they want their children to make it. So I think when I started dating my ex, who was my first boyfriend, and it was there was a bit of tension between me and my mom. And then, of course, I decided to get married, and they were fine with that. But again, I think when we say love marriage, there's always this angle of love and arranged in South Asia. Right? I mean, it's one of those few countries where there can be a love marriage, there can be an arranged marriage. And there's always this striving amongst us to also prove it as a love come arranged marriage, because you somehow want to make sure that your parents are okay with it. So in my case, I think my parents were fine with my decision. So I decided to go and get married. I guess 5 years later, I realized that we weren't on the same life goals. We were on different paths, and we wanted to build lives differently, and it wasn't the right thing for us. So when I decided to tell my mom that I have decided to get a divorce, I think she was of course shocked, but it's also a question of, oh, you made this decision yourself. You decided to get married. You chose this person. So how can it be that you don't want to be with this person anymore? So I think that's how the whole story kind of unraveled. And it's like starting with, you have chosen this person, and then you are supposed to be with this person forever. And then being shocked that you have decided not to be with this person anymore.
Let's rewind back. I love the fact that a lot of us, when we start dating, we don't tell our parents.
Yeah.
I know I was really excited when I had my first boyfriend, and I was sitting at the dining table with my parents, and I was like, I have something to tell you. And they were like, what is it? And I was like, I have a boyfriend. And they were like, what? But so they were very, very pleased that I could tell them. But I also know a lot of my friends couldn't. So
Right.
You had a relationship with your mom where you could share this with her. Do you remember the day when you broke this news to her?
To be honest, I didn't really have to break the news because I was a day scholar in Rourkela, and she found it from someone that, your daughter is roaming around with this guy. We have seen her multiple times. So it wasn't really breaking the news. She, in fact, confronted me saying, I heard that you're going around with this guy. And I'm like, yeah, so he is my boyfriend. And she's like, why do you need a boyfriend at this age? You need to focus on your study. In fact, my mom sent me a letter in a lunchbox, because I was in the hostel, and she came to drop off lunch, and I said, that's very nice of her, and I opened the lunchbox, and there's a letter in there. So kind of the message being, just focus on your studies, and you will find love when the time comes. So yeah, I think for parents, like you said, it's just a concept that isn't. It's like a child making a decision is not something that they can understand at that particular age. because they are like, you're too young to make a decision, to be with someone, to even try out. But I think this is where we sometimes mess up, because we decide to be with one person and then we meet them and then we are like, oh, we cannot date around, because then there's this question, there's this, a lot of scrutiny around whether you made the right decision or not. And then so you want to stick with the person and you don't want to break up, and because you don't want, again, further questions about whether somebody is going around different people. So I think that kind of plays into a lot of initial dating life of children in India, and their relationship with their parents in some ways.
It's very interesting you say that, because then I have to ask, did you feel that kind of pressure? Like, if you were to go back, would you say, I probably would have dated other people at that point of time before making the decision that this is the person I'm going to marry?
That's a good question. And I think maybe because if we had a culture of dating that was acceptable in India, and I think it would be much more normal to say, if I think this is not working, I would be okay with probably breaking it and then trying another relationship. I think it's also less about parents sometimes. It's a lot more to do with the overall society. A woman who is dating multiple people on a row is considered a slut in India. And there's a lot of peer pressure as well. So I think all of it has a role to play in terms of how we decide to manage our dating life. And a lot of us decide to just stick to one person, or a lot of us decide to just, keep our dating life very, very private. I knew friends who would date somebody, I'm looking at you, Ankita, but who wouldn't really, tell that. You find that out a few months later that they had dated, because they're just not comfortable talking about it. And I think it's a lot to do with the overall societal view on dating and relationships in India.
Absolutely, 100%. And I love that you said, I'm looking at you, Ankita, because when we were in college, I was dating someone, but there was just I think there was an impression that the moment you say, this is my boyfriend, it has a bigger meaning than something that is temporary, may not last, is fleeting. So there's a fear to label it, because like after that,
Right.
you feel the pressure of, like, I can't just wake up one morning and say, I'm done, let's move on. Okay, so let's come to when you actually decided to get married. Did you have any doubts going into that decision?
I think, again, the same way I talked about how we think about or how we approach our dating and relationships in our early days. I think marriage is also to do with how we are expected to make a decision quite early in our life about getting married. And, I've been with my boyfriend, who then I married, for, 5 to 6 years. And then the next step is to get married. And, you don't really have an option. That's kind of the path that has been charted. So while my parents, have been really modern in their thinking when it comes to education and so on, for them it was also important that whether if I'm with this person, then I should make a decision of what my next steps are. So I think in some ways I felt like I had to make a decision. And because I had been with this person for a long time, you kind of have to then decide whether you want to get married or not. And I decided to get married because I was like, what else is an option? And I think I was too young to also know my options, because also at that point in time I was still young, still not very sure of what I want in my life. And I think in some ways my decision to get married was, of course, one reason was I was in love with that person at that time, but also because I did not have any other options as something for a young woman to make. So I think that's what played into my decision.
How old were you when you got married?
I was 24.
That is young, yeah. Tell me about, so you got married. After a few years, you realized this is not working.
Yeah.
Did you ever tell your mom before you took the decision to split?
No, not really. I think I think I struggled with it myself in terms of coming to the terms that I will probably decide to divorce and go separate ways. And I think I did not feel comfortable talking to my mom about it, because I knew her reaction would be to make it work. Because I had seen her do that to somebody else, for example, like, somebody who is not happy with their marriage. She's like, you need to adjust and you need to accommodate. And I think that's what the society tells us. So I think I took my own time to really decide whether I wanted to be on my own. And so that, like, the first time I really told her was when I had actually made the decision, and not, not in a way that I was consulting her for her views, but I had made up my mind that I'm gonna get a divorce.
And what was the first thing she said?
She was, of course, shocked, and she said, how can that be possible? I mean, also, you had a love marriage. So why are you getting a divorce? And you're supposed to make it work because, marriages are hard. I think there's this notion again in the society that it's difficult to maintain than to exit. So there's always this whole importance given to trying and adjusting and compromising. And I think somewhere it becomes a norm. And that's why when you decide to exit, it's not something that everybody understands. They are like, have you tried enough? Have you made sure that everything possible has been tried and then you've made this decision? So I think that was her reaction. Her reaction was, of course, hers, but also representative of how the society reacts to this. And also, I think the whole other layer of love marriage, right? And it's like, divorce itself is a stigmatizing action in India. But then if you've had a love marriage, the blame is somehow put on the person again, because you decided to do it in the first place, and then you're now deciding to not do it. So you're doing two things that are kind of against the norms in some ways. So there's, I think, an extra amount of criticism that is associated with a divorce when you've also decided to get married in the first place by yourself.
And I think I've said this before on the podcast, and the reason why we really embarked on this season is because we know the society's opinion on a lot of things. And we grow up learning from it. But sometimes when our mothers say something that's different from the society, it gives us the confidence to go ahead and make that decision. So, for example, when you talked about the color of your skin, I have a very close friend who grew up always thinking about her color of her skin, because while growing up, her mom was like, don't go out in the sun, kali ho jayegi, kind of thing, or like, you're already so dark, take care of your skin, right, or like hair and everything else. Whereas it didn't impact you, even though you grew up knowing that in the society there is a preferred color tone and a difference in that. And it's that, right? Like sometimes our moms back us up in a way that we stop caring about society as a whole. So I'm really curious, what was the impact of this statement on you at that moment?
I think I felt a little let down in some ways, especially because I've always thought of my mom as a role model. And as I said, I've always thought of her as a pioneer woman. And so I somehow thought that she would understand this, and she wouldn't question me on my decision making, because she would at least try to understand what I'm feeling. And I think that's where of course, at that point in time, I was hurt, and I was looking for comfort. And but later, I've had infinite conversations with my parents and my mom, especially on this matter. And it's a long time now since the divorce, so we've all come to terms with it. And I think what I have realized later, as I have gone through this whole process in my head and talked to friends, talked to my therapist as to what did I really feel, I also felt a bit sorry for my mom in some ways, that she had to say it. I know she loves me a lot, but she somehow had to say it because as a society, we are unforgiving to our mothers. And that's why moms have to be even more harsh to their children, because they are going to be judged by their friends and peers for whatever their children made decisions about. So I think in some ways she was trying to think in her head what she had to tell her friends and her family. Like, why is her daughter making this decision? So her question was actually more like, all right, what do I have to tell my friends and family in some ways? because she's going to be judged for that. And I think that's what has stuck with me, that we should just try to be a little bit more forgiving to our moms. And not just we, as the society, there's this immense pressure of how a child's character is reflective of their parents or their moms. And I think we need to get away from that. A child, of course, is raised by the mom, but the child also goes and makes their own mind. They travel, they read, they have friends. All of that influence their final decision-making capability. So yeah, I think that's my takeaway has been is, if I have to think about anybody in the world I have to be kind to, I think I have to be really, really kind to moms, because they are judged the most in a lot of ways. They're judged the most as how they're raising their kids and how their kids turn out to be and what kind of decisions their kids are making. So yeah, I think that was my final kind of understanding of this whole process when I went through it. And now I think, I'm in a place with my mom when I can actually tell her that, you can put your happiness first. You are allowed to choose your happiness, because if you're not happy, then you cannot make others happy. And I think, again, as moms, you're kind of conditioned to put everybody's happiness first. So there are a lot of things to play in here, and yeah, I think from here I've just decided that one is, I'm going to choose my happiness. Even if I become a mom someday, I would like to, of course, be I would love to give unconditional love, but I also would like to keep my happiness still first. Yeah, and kind of break the cycle in some ways. The reason I'm speaking about this is it's my effort to break the cycle in some ways, so that, maybe some mom will listen to this and not say this to their daughter when their daughter is making a decision that is hard for them to understand, and instead try to understand what their daughter is feeling.
100%. Like, I think what you said is, I want to say it's different. This is a unique characteristic of South Asia as compared to at least what I've seen of Europe, and then you can talk about US. You're very right. Like, your parents are judged by the decisions the child makes after a certain age, right? So it's absolutely okay for, parents to be held responsible if a child is going completely wild at the age of 6, 7, or to a certain extent. I think there's an expiry date. You can't, yes, they feel proud and they can take credit for how we've shaped up later in life, but the whole bludgeoning of, you didn't teach your daughter better and hence she look at the decision she's made, has to stop. And that is a cycle I think society needs to break to start with, but then as we as individuals need to start developing and understanding, we're not defined when we become mothers, or when we see don't judge other mothers by how their kids have turned out, because I'm guilty of doing that at times, right? I think there's an expiry date to blaming the parent for how the kid turned out.
Yeah. I told my mom when she was asking me this question, or I could sense that she was more worried about her peer circle and what they would say. I said, you can tell them that, my daughter is an adult and she made this decision. I am not taking any responsibility in her decision making. So you can live your life. And I think, I can say it very lightly, but I think there are a lot of women who struggle to make these decisions, the same decision I made, because they have to, in some ways, think about their parents, think about their relatives, and think about the image of what they would be perceived as. And, it's even harder for women than men, even if they're going through the same divorce. Because, again, as a society, we are just more forgiving of men making a decision like that than women, because they're like, oh, men are like this, it's fine, they're going to do this. But women should be, women should be sacrificing their happiness, women should be adjusting. So I think as women, we just also need to be a bit more strong and, just understand that we know the best thing for ourselves and trust that.
Absolutely. I have 3 last questions for you. 1, How long did it take your mom to come to terms with the divorce?
I think it took her a few months to come to terms with it. We had enormous amount of conversations about this, and I know she was hurt. But I think the point where she realized that if I continue on the path, I would be really unhappy, and it would affect my mental health. I think that's the point. Then she realized that she has to look out for my mental health than just sticking to what the society has laid out plans for myself.
Second, tell us about where you are in life right now. I know congratulations are in order. You've just got a brand new wedding ring.
I did. I managed to make another love marriage. I recently got married a few weeks ago to someone I met in New York, and it's been a journey in itself. Again, kind of finding myself and finding what I really like in a relationship, and healing in the process. And I'm very happy.
We're really, really glad to hear that. And my last question, what do you wish your mom had said instead? Do you first shared the news of the divorce?
I think I would have really appreciated it if she had just said, "I'm so sorry to hear that, beta, and I'm gonna be here for you." I guess that's all I needed.
And that's usually all we need to hear from our parents,
Yeah.
but 99% of the time. But Swagatika, thank you so much for joining me on the show today and sharing your story. I know these conversations are never easy, but I love having you here. I knew right from the start that you should be someone here because you have a lot of stories to share. Maybe we got just one part of it, and over time, as we release more seasons, I'll be like, come back because yeah, you are a part of our prickly pear community now.
Thank you, Ankita, and thanks for having me here. And you guys are doing an amazing job of, trying to break the cycle. And we will break the cycle if we can say it out loud about what our mom said that we were not okay with. And I think we have discussed this as well. I think in this process we are also finding more kindness for our moms because we are realizing that they are somehow caught in the cycle. And
Exactly.
yeah, so you're doing a great job and keep it up.
Thank you. And I kind of think, our tagline for this season probably should have been break the generational trauma, but I love to see how through these stories you're doing your part to break it, and then we'll keep going. But thank you so much for your kind words. On that note, I'm going to get us out of here. We are out.